Hello, Mrs. Green here. Today we're going to be looking at a poem called Mrs. Midas by Caroline Duffy. To start us off, can you have a look at the pictures here and decide which one you would wish for if you could have anything you wanted? Write down your wish and use the word because to explain your answer. And pause the video for a minute while you write it down. The poem we're going to be looking at is a narrative poem. That means it tells a story. Like most narrative poems, it's quite long. Our job today is to explore and understand the story and find out about the characters in it. This is a summary of what the story of the poem tells. Listen to it and make notes while I read the information. Try to write down at least 3 to 5 pieces of new information. In Greek mythology, Midas was a king who was granted one wish by Dionysus, god of fertility and wine. Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. After delightedly turning trees and rocks into gold by touching them, he returned home to eat a lavish feast. He soon realised that any food he touched turned to gold and he would soon die of starvation. He even accidentally turned his beloved daughter into gold. The myth is a warning against greed. So, although the story is very old, our poet, Caroline Duffy, imagines it as though it's happening in our time and tells the story from the point of view of Midas's wife, as though they were two ordinary people like you and me. But there are still some words in it that we might not know, so I'll go through a few of them first. The first one is blanching. Blanching means whitening. The next one is fragrant. Fragrant means perfumed. It's often used talking about perfumes like flowers and fruit. Chalice means goblet, so it's a drinking cup. Aurum is the Latin word for gold. Luteus means being an orange or yellow colour. Trout is a kind of fish. So if you'd like to stop the video now, choose one of those words and explode it in your notebook. Okay, when you're ready, we'll go on. This is a feminist poem written by a very vocal feminist. It comes from a collection called The World's Wife, in which she tells a lot of stories from the point of view of the wives of famous people. Feminism is the belief that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities. Now, here are some of the devices that the poet uses to bring the story alive. I'd like you to pause the video for a few minutes now and see if you can remember what they mean and write down some definitions and, if you can, examples. When you've done that, we'll go on. Here are my definitions. Personification is talking about things as if they were a person. For example, I might say the breeze whispered excitedly in the trees, if I thought the breeze sounded like people talking. The next one is simile, which means making a comparison. It's usually in the form as something, or you can use like. Maybe the branches waved like flags in the wind. The next one's metaphor, which is using something as a symbol of another thing. I could, for example, say the hills lay under a blanket of snow, and I'm pretending that the covering of snow is like a blanket on a bed. A rhetorical question is a question asked for dramatic effect. So you don't necessarily want an answer, you just want people to hear the question. For example, we all love a good storm, don't we? and then lists of 3. A lot of writers use 3 echoing words or phrases to emphasize their point. So for example, I could say, my nose is cold, red, freezing. And finally, short sentences. They're often used to make a text run faster, to show that things are moving a lot. For example, I might say, I put my coat over my head, I flung the door open, I ran down the steps, I splashed across the street, I dived into the car. And those sentences make it easier to imagine it's happening really quickly. Okay, I'm going to read the poem now, and you can follow it on the video as I read, and afterwards you can rewind at any time if you want to look again to check the notes you've made or the devices you've written down. I've put numbers on each section of the poem, so it's easier to find them again if you need to. So, Mrs. Midas by Carol Ann Duffy. It was late September. I'd just poured a glass of wine, begun to unwind while the vegetables cooked. The kitchen filled with the smell of itself, relaxed, its steamy breath gently blanching the windows. So I opened one, then with my fingers wiped the other's glass like a brow. He was standing under the pear tree, snapping a twig. Now the garden was long and the visibility poor. The way dark of the ground seems to drink the light of the sky. But that twig in his hand was gold. And then he plucked a pear from a branch. We grew fondant d'automne, and it sat in his palm like a light bulb. On. I thought to myself, is he putting fairy lights in the tree? He came into the house. The doorknobs gleamed. He drew the blinds. You know the mind. I thought of the Field of the Cloth of Gold and of Miss Macready. He sat in that chair like a king on a burnished throne. The look on his face was strange, wild, vain. I said, what in the name of God is going on? He started to laugh. I served up the meal. For starters, corn on the cob. Within seconds he was spitting out the teeth of the rich. He toyed with his spoon, then mine, then with the knives, the forks. He asked where was the wine. I poured with a shaking hand. A fragrant bone-dry white from Italy, then watched as he picked up the glass goblet, golden chalice, drank. It was then that I started to scream. He sank to his knees. After we'd both calmed down, I finished the wine on my own, hearing him out. I made him sit on the other side of the room and keep his hands to himself. I locked the cat in the cellar. I moved the phone. The toilet I didn't mind. I couldn't believe my ears. How he'd had a wish. Look, we all have wishes, granted. But who has wishes granted? Him. Do you know about gold? It feeds no one, our room. Soft, untarnishable, slakes no thirst. He tried to light a cigarette. I gazed, entranced, as the blue flame played on its lute's stem. At least, I said, you'll be able to give up smoking for good. Separate beds. In fact, I put a chair against my door, near petrified. He was below, turning the spare room into the tomb of Tutankhamun. You see, we were passionate then, in those halcyon days, unwrapping each other rapidly, like presents, fast food. But now I feared his honeyed embrace, the kiss that would turn my lips to a work of art. And who, when it comes to the crunch, can live with a heart of gold? That night I dreamt I bore his child, its perfect o'er limbs, its little tongue like a precious latch, its amber eyes holding their pupils like flies. My dream milk burned in my breasts. I woke to the streaming sun. So he had to move out. We'd a caravan in the wilds in a glade of its own. I drove him up under the cover of dark. He sat in the back, and then I came home, the woman who married the fool who wished for gold. At first I visited odd times, parking the car a good way off, then walking. You knew you were getting close. Golden trout on the grass. One day a hare hung from a larch. A beautiful lemon mistake. And then his footprints glistening next to the river's path. He was thin, delirious, hearing, he said, the music of Pan from the woods. Listen, that was the last straw. What gets me now is not the idiocy or greed, but the lack of thought for me, pure selfishness. I sold the contents of the house and came down here. I think of him in certain lights, dawn, late afternoon, and once a bowl of apples stopped me dead. I miss most, even now, his hands, his warm hands on my skin, his touch. Okay, now you can use the devices you've noted down to help you write about how the characters are presented. If you don't think you've got enough material, you can rewind and look at some parts of the poem again to find them. And you can use the sentence guides here if you want to. So, pause the video or go back and look again at the poem and then do your writing. Run on again when you're ready. Right. Next, we're going to write a play script of an argument between Mr. and Mrs. Midas. Write at least 5 lines for each character. And again, if you want to, you can go back and look at the poem or look at your notes to get ideas. And when you've done that, you can think about the poem and everything you've written, and then see if you can write an answer to this question. Why might this be seen as a feminist poem? Okay, thank you. That's the end.